of the painful history that exists. He also announced a plan to have the Day of Reconciliation celebrated in unity by all races as a National Day of Reconciliation. Ramaphosa has been addressing the crowd at the official Reconciliation Day commemoration at the Ngome Museum in the Umzinyati district in the KwaZulu-Natal province.
Commemorating the 16th of December provides us with an opportunity to confront our past with honesty, to acknowledge the complexity of our shared history, and commit ourselves to building a peaceful future together. And it is quite significant that today we have representatives of the Afrikaner National Group. Our nation is South Africa. We are the South African nation.
And South Africa's Border Management Authority, BMA, at the Beitbridge border post in Musina, Limpopo, says it's processing high volumes of travellers, including trucks at the port of entry. BMA commander in the Northern region, Ndakuseni Lumbani acknowledges the high number of trucks of the South African side, saying it's due to inadequate parking space on the Zimbabwean side of the border. Lumbani, however, says that they've deployed manpower to deal with the situation.
So what we pick up is that on their side they do not have enough parking space, and therefore at some point they stop trucks moving to their country. That frustrates us a lot, because when they stop processing, the trucks build up on the N1. But in the border itself, we've deployed additional resources from all stakeholders, including BMA.
And the World Food Programme, WFP, has warned of growing crisis in Afghanistan, with more than 17 million people facing acute hunger this winter. International aid to war-torn Afghanistan was dwindled significantly since 2021, when US-led forces exited the country and the Taliban regained power. The BBC's Anabarasan Ethirajan has the details.
The UN agency's assessment on Afghanistan is bleak. It says child malnutrition is projected to rise, affecting nearly 4 million children in the coming year. Afghanistan is bracing for a harsh and unforgiving winter as multiple crises converge. Drought has affected half the country and destroyed crops.
A recap of your top story. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres has warned that corruption is costing lives, deepening inequality and damaging the planet. Speaking at the 11th UN Anti-Corruption Conference, COSP11, underway in Doha, Qatar, where he stressed that corruption is not a victimless crime. For any news stories you'd like to share with us, please send an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +2711 714 4459. For Channel Africa News, I am Matapala Mahape.
SABC News. The African Perspective.
And coming up in sports news this hour, a Paris Labour court has ordered French football giants Paris Saint-Germain to pay Kylian Mbappe unpaid bonuses and salaries, while South African cricket franchise partners with Velocity as its team's official financial advisory partner. Details of these and other stories coming up at 4:30.
Business, trade, and investment opportunities that put the continent first. African Business with Thami Ngubeni.
It has gone exactly 7 minutes after 4 p.m. A very good afternoon to you, Africa. It is officially the last week for Africa in Business. And what we're going to do throughout the course of this week is give you a good roundup of all the leading sectors. Today, we're going to be focusing on trade on the African continent. Trade and some of the major events this year were the Trump tariffs with the United States, the end of AGOA, and also the rising geopolitical tensions which disrupted traditional trade relationships and also increased uncertainty. We'll be taking a look at the African Continental Free Trade Area as well, building internal markets, reducing dependence on external partners, and promoting value addition and local industrialization. We'll be joined by trade analyst Viwe Njongwana this hour. Do stay with us. This is Africa in Business on Channel Africa, and continue interacting with us on our various social social media platforms. On X, Instagram and YouTube, you'll find us at Channel Africa 1, and on Facebook we are at Channel Africa.
As 2025 draws to a close, we pause to honor the spirits that connect us. The festive season reminds us of what truly matters: family, community, and unity. No matter where you gather or reflect, Channel Africa is with you, bringing you stories and voices that are shaped by the African perspective.
Something significant happened on this day. Asanda, you were a baby, I'm sure. I'm not even sure if you were born. No, you were a baby, yeah.
Yoga. Matseko is still trying to convince me and look me
No,
over
I've done that already, and you're going to come now on the journey.
I will try.
From all of us to all of you, may your season be safe and peaceful. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
We begin here this afternoon with South Africa's central bank. It's planning the biggest overhaul of the country's cash systems in decades. The move includes the creation of a new cash management company, the rollout of white label ATMs, and tighter oversight of how money circulates. And all of this is aimed at making cash cheaper and easier to access. But the big question remains: is South Africa ready for a cashless society? Channel Africa's economics reporter spoke to locals and filed this report.
Cash circulating through Africa's largest economy amounts to nearly $11 billion, or about 2.5% of GDP, and still makes up roughly 2/3 of all transaction volumes, despite the steady growth of digital payments. Mining industry executive Kilepile Dintwe believes South Africa is ready for a cashless economy.
I think South Africa, we are definitely ready. We have a network that is available because you require infrastructure to enable that. There's the first part. The second part, obviously, the rural community. There's also a psychology factor here with the elderly who would still want and trust cash to be what it is in their hand as notes. So for you now to expect them to have a numeric capability of analyzing a statement or relying on any form of accounting presentation on a cell phone that says that, she knows that she had 50 rands and she paid 30 rands for sugar and tea. She knows she's got 20 rands in her hand. That's what she feels. Now, all of a sudden, she must make up that to be existing in her mind and not being in her purse.
Handling cash can be expensive, and at times, citizens pay the price. Social media specialist Spiwe Mtombeni says the move should not be rushed or forced.
I think the move to remove ATMs and go cashless is mainly about convenience and cutting costs, but it's not simple for everyone. So while digital payments are easy for many people in the cities, cash is still very important for people in the villages, especially informal traders, grant recipients, and older people who may not have smartphones, data, or confidence. Going cashless shouldn't be rushed or forced.
Meanwhile, entrepreneur Petronella Mudzingwa says the SADC region is not yet ready to fully transition to a digital economy.
I don't think we're ready for a cashless economy. I think those things work in certain economies. For example, in the case of Zimbabwe, we could say it's a cashless economy because of the demand for cash. There was no cash, so they were forced by circumstances to go digital. That's why you notice even when we tried to introduce digital money in South Africa, it did not work initially because there was no demand for it.
Engineer Dalton Chilani says the idea has merit, but warns that inequality and a lack of information remain long-standing challenges.
Life in South Africa favors certain people who have got every document. I'm not talking about foreign nationals, I'm just talking about our home-based citizens. Most of them do not even have it. That's why there is Kumbulekaya, everyone is going there. Most of our people are going there at the age of 40, someone is still looking for a ID, a document.
As South Africa weighs the future of cash, the debate continues, balancing convenience and innovation against inclusion, safety and readiness in a rapidly challenging digital economy. For Channel Africa News, I'm Innocent Simos in Johannesburg.
It has gone exactly 13 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. In 2025, Africa's trade landscape underwent major changes. The introduction of reciprocal tariffs by the Trump administration, the expiry of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, and rising geopolitical tensions disrupted traditional trade relationships and increased uncertainty. Now, these global shocks raised costs, they slowed investment, and created strong headwinds for emerging markets across the continent. In response, African countries intensified efforts to strengthen regional integration. The focus shifted towards fast-tracking the African Continental Free Trade Area, building internal markets, reducing dependence on external partners, and promoting value addition and local industrialization. For more on this, we joined on the line by trade analyst Viwe Njongwana. A very good afternoon to you, Viwe. You know, when you look at all the highlights of 2025 as far as shifts within the global trade environment, you can see that it has indeed been a disruptive year in many aspects. But I'd like us to start first with Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Would you say that they characterized the global trade policy environment for the 2025 year?
Good afternoon, Thami. To answer your question, definitely. I think this has been, quite an eventful year, a learning curve, even for the global economy. Tariffs are very low-lying, should I call them trade tools that people generally don't pay attention to in our day-to-day lives. But President Trump has really forced us to pay attention to them by weaponizing them. That's the first thing. And secondly, obviously, it's got implication in our various domestic economies, including South Africa's. But something I must mention, Tammy, is that, the weaponization of trade, and perhaps should I say the manner in which President Trump has chosen to do diplomacy, may move the US away from the role that they characteristically played of underpinning the global economy, and that may create a void for other developed economies to try and fill. So, what effectively, in an unintended way, I assume, has taken place is that the US is abdicating their responsibility as a global superpower by stabilizing the global economy. On the contrary, they are actually perhaps destabilizing the global economy.
So, with this foundation laid now, the United States and its tariffs, what can we foresee for 2026 as far as now the global shifts in trade relations with, as you've mentioned, America, quote unquote, abdicating its role as the superpower? What are we likely to see as the emerging new powers and the emerging new dynamics of trade as far as Africa is concerned?
Well, China and the European Union are fighting to fill that void that the US is creating. So, what you're going to find is that there are going to be tensions that are created that are already there between China and the European Union in an attempt to fill the void. And what it means for Africa is that it must find its feet in that setting and find a developed economy, either the US still, or China, or the EU, to underpin their own economies. Remember, developing economies like Africa's economy and maybe to some extent emerging economies, which also Africa is, need to find a developed economy to develop their own economy. So we still need these other economies, your EU's, your China's, and your US, but we may be forced to try and see which horse to back, so to speak, in that regard.
Mm. And how would you rate India's engagement with the continent, including investment and trade initiatives? We saw quite a few of those continuing to grow the South-South economic ties in 2025.
Yes, the global south is going to become very crucial for Africa, especially if there are volatilities around the developed economies. And volatilities mean unpredictability, and unpredictability means that you cannot take on a growth path with an intended outcome or a predictable outcome. So you find countries like India, your countries like Japan, who may increasingly become very crucial. And if South Africa were even in a better place economically, we could have also played a similar role to say that while the superpowers are slugging it out amongst themselves, we also have development propositions. But unfortunately, due to our sluggish economy, we might not be able to play that role as effectively as your countries like India, your countries like Japan, perhaps I could include your France and so on.
And let's take a look at what we saw emerging in 2025. There was a heightened trade protectionism globally. Going forward, how will this reshape Africa's access to key export markets?
Well, trade protectionism is a result of a volatile global economy. And I think many economies, if not every economy in the world, is trying to stabilize its domestic economy and therefore turning to protectionist measures to stabilize in that regard. For Africa, I tend to view crises, Tami, as opportunities. And I think we need to exploit the opportunities domestically within the continent to say that let us expand our infrastructure domestically. By domestically, I mean within Africa, intra Africa, and let us begin to trade domestically because of the protectionist measures that have arisen globally. But what it also means is that when we approach our trading partners, especially those that are fighting to fill the void that the US are beginning to create or have created increasingly, we need to approach them with leverage and with strength to say that as we trade with you, we are trying to create better opportunities, not only for Africa, but reciprocally with the EU, reciprocally with China, and almost to some degree play off these superpowers, play them off each other to create an opportunity and to lower costs for African trade.
And Vera, I wonder, multilateral trade institutions like the World Trade Organization, how influential are they? Do they still hold the same stature? Do they still have the same impact that they had decades ago?
Look, when you look at these institutions such as the World Trade Organization, they were never supposed to be the main player when it comes to trade. They are just supposed to be the referee to make sure that the terms and conditions are upheld. But nation states have always been, uh, uh, um, the main players when it comes to trade. What it means for the World Trade Organization is that it has to adapt like every other stakeholder currently has to adapt. Nation states, regions have to adapt, institutions have to adapt. So it's no different to the World Trade Organization and other like institutions. They have to adapt to maintain their relevance, but also to continue to speaking into the situations that we are faced with and to speak relevantly. That is where their legitimacy lies. I don't think they will necessarily become irrelevant, but they need to adapt to what is taking place globally and project themselves relevantly to referee world trade. But they'll always be relevant as long as we have globalization. Those institutions, those multi national institutions will increasingly become more relevant.
And are we likely to see bilateral and regional trade agreements becoming the norm?
Yes, yes, they'll have to become the norm because of the volatilities globally. Unfortunately, well, let me not say unfortunately, but within the different regions in Africa and Africa as a region itself, we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to make certain agreements lucrative because it doesn't make sense, to increase trade, yet the infrastructure that facilitates the trade is rather either dilapidated or underdeveloped. So what we need to do within the continent is to make sure that all trade infrastructure is upgraded, is developed, so as to facilitate trade in a lucrative manner.
Mm.
And that's where the West have an advantage. That's where the traditionally developed advantage is that their infrastructure is still developed and therefore may have a better value proposition than trade, intra-Africa trade rather.
And talking about intra-African trade, has the African Continental Free Trade Area begun to materially cushion African countries against the global trade shocks that we saw in the year that was?
Not enough, not enough. Precisely because of what I've said, that many African countries are still dependent on developed nations, which are, for the most part, outside of the continent, to develop their own economies, or they perceive it that way. That's the first thing. The second thing is that financial infrastructure, logistical infrastructure is still largely in favor of the West, still largely in favor of Europe and other nations that are outside the continent. So we don't have a safe refuge yet in the AFCFTA, but I do believe that if we focus on it, especially given the volatilities of the global economy, in the next 5, 10 years, we might be saying something a bit different, and Africa can be protected through the AFCFTA.
All right, Viwe and Jongwana, thank you so much for our trade wrap for the year 2025, taking a look at the role of the African Continental Free Trade Area, as well as the unrealized potential and maybe some of the policy bottlenecks that are still there, preventing it from unlocking intra-African trade at the scale that has been envisaged. Also looking at the impact of the Trump tariffs and just changing the entire global trade landscape, the emerging powers, China, the EU, for example, and just what we may be seeing more of, bilateral and regional trade agreements in a largely unstable global environment. Viwe Njongana, thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Thami.
Thank you. That's trade analyst Viwe Njongwana, taking us to exactly 28 minutes after 4 p.m.
9 to 12 midday, Central African Time. On the move with Palisa Tau and Benjamin Mushatama.
Now, when you go to the hospital, there's medical attention that you need, and that's the only experience you're expecting to have. If you are a transgender person, sometimes those experiences can be marred by the demand of trying to understand your gender, your sexuality, and not particularly getting the assistance that you need.
One time, I was sexually abused by someone who used to live next door to my house. So when I went to the police to report, I was in a weave, I was wearing a dress, and when I got there, the police person that helped me said to me, obviously we're gonna rape you because why do you walk around looking like trying to be a woman when you are a man? And after that, the person just walked scot-free.
How do you deal with that? Because there's a double barrel abuse there. So it's not even double barrels, there's kind of multi-dimensional forms of abuse.
I think one thing that I will tell you about trans people is we are strong, not because we want to be strong, but because we don't have an option. It is what it is. Because the struggles that we face each and every day are like unimaginable.
Keeping you on the know and on the move. Connecting Africa to the world. Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni brings you the latest insights on Africa's economy.
It is 29 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African Time. On the other side of our business of sport and market indicator update, we'll be wrapping up our Standard Bank slot for this year. And today we'll be reflecting on the annual Standard Bank Enterprise and Supplier Development Awards that were held last Friday at the Westcliff Hotel in Johannesburg. We'll also take a look at the energy sector in South Africa and the adoption of the Integrated Resource Plan 2025. But for now, let's hand over to the markets desk where Chanduko Ligege is standing by with your latest market indicators at 4:30.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you, Tommy. Good afternoon. $1 is trading at 16 Rand 82 in South Africa, Botswana 13.09, Namibia 16 Namibian dollars 82, Zambia 23 kwacha 09 to the US dollar. Kenya, the dollar is 128 shilling 11, Ethiopia 155 big 48, Uganda 3,000 shilling 535, Tanzania 2,000 shilling 477. $1 in Nigeria is trading at 1,451 naira. In Egypt, the dollar is 47 Egyptian pound 40. Tunisia 2 dinar 90. Algeria 128 dinar 95. In Morocco, the dollar will cost you 9 dirham 08. In Angola, 912 kwanza. The Congolese franc is 2,000. 2023 to the US dollar. And looking at commodities, gold is trading at $4,333, platinum at $1,786 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $60.89 a barrel. That is all from me. For any stories you'd like to share with us, please send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za, or you can call us on +27 11 714 4459. For Channel Africa Business, I am Chanduko Ligege.
Business News on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
And standing by with the latest from the business of sport, here is Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African Perspective.
Thank you so much, Thami. A very good afternoon from the sports desk. We'll start with the story. So a Paris Labour court has ordered French football giants Paris Saint-Germain to pay Kylian Mbappe $57 million in unpaid salary and bonuses, drawing a line under a bit of financial dispute. The decision earlier today concludes months of legal contention after the France captain initiated proceedings against his former club. Mbappe claimed earnings for April, May and June of 2024 were withheld just prior to his high-profile free transfer move to Real Madrid. Now, the court determined that PSG had indeed failed to disperse 3 months of his salary and ethics bonus, as well as a signing bonus stipulated in his employment contract. These outstanding sums had previously been acknowledged by the French Football League, also known as the LFP, in September and October of 2024. Onto the story now. Scotland's national men's football team head coach Steve Clarke has urged fans not to put themselves into debt to secure World Cup tickets for next year's global showpiece co-hosted by the USA, Canada as well as Mexico. Scotland have been drawn against Brazil, Morocco as well as Haiti in Group C, with tickets costing between $179 to $704 for group stage matches, with the Association of Tartan Army Clubs branding the cost disgraceful and disgusting. This is what the coach had to say about those ticket prices.
We can't control the prices. Listen, it's expensive to go to America anyway. Even if you're going on holiday to America, you need to save up, and you need to save up, and you need to save up to get across the Atlantic and have your holiday there. So it was always going to be an expensive World Cup. The tickets are set, the ticket prices are set by FIFA. My biggest wish is that people don't put themselves into too much debt trying to get there. If you can afford to go, then great. But if you can't afford to go, then understand that don't put yourself and your family into debt. I think that's a big thing for me. I'd like to think that with the smaller allocation that we've got, that a lot of the fans who travel everywhere watching it, and I'm talking about going to the far-flung places, that maybe only 1,200 people will turn up.
Back home now, the South African cricket franchise Pretoria Capitals had partnered with Velocity as the team's official financial advisory partner, with branding to appear on the back of cap for the Betway SA 2020-25-2026 season. Velocity is one of South Africa's trusted financial advisory as well as wealth planning firms, helping clients navigate investments, insurance, retirement planning as well as long-term financial strategy with clarity and confidence. Their emphasis on disciplined planning as well as transparent guidance aligns strongly with Pretoria Capital's commitment to long-term performance excellence. The partnership launches ahead of the Capital's season opener on the 27th of December, when they host provincial rivals, the Joburg Super Kings, in the capital city, Pretoria. While the Tennis Australia governing body has bolstered its commercial portfolio, adding digital asset platform Nexo to as the first cryptocurrency partner of its flagship Australian Open Grand Slam as well as warm-up tournaments. Now, the multi-year deal sees Nexo become the official crypto partner of the Australian Open as well as other tournaments organised by Tennis Australia, including the Mixed Gender United States Teams Tournament, the Adelaide International, the Brisbane International as well as the Hobart International. Now, as part of the agreement, Nexo will gain visibility at the Australian Open by sponsoring the tournament's coaching pods, a dedicated area closer to the court that was introduced in 2025, in which 4 members of the players' support staff are allowed to provide more frequent in-match coaching. Nexo branding will also appear across the coaching areas in Rod Laver Arena, the Margaret Court Arena, John Cain Arena, the Kia Arena, starting from the 2026 edition, which will run between the 12th of January and the 1st of February at the Melbourne Park in the state of Victoria. The deal also builds on Nexo's growing sporting sponsorship portfolio. Well, that concludes your sports news this hour. For any sports stories you'd like to share with us, remember to send us an email to newsroom@channelafrica.co.za or call us on +27 11714 4459. More sporting updates tomorrow morning on Africa Rise and Shine. For Channel Africa Sport, I am Musibudi Makura.
Sports on Channel Africa. The African perspective. Africa in business on Channel Africa.
37 minutes after 4 p.m. Central African time. Now, South Africa's energy sector is undergoing its most significant transformation in decades. Eskom's restructuring, new procurement rounds, large-scale grid expansion plans, and the adoption of the Integrated Resource Plan 2025 are reshaping how electricity is generated, transmitted, and traded. And at the same time, tough choices are being made about the future role of coal, the pace of renewable energy deployment, and renewed interest in nuclear power. Earlier, I spoke to Matthew Cruz, an expert in the energy sector from Empower. So perhaps let's start off with just an understanding of to what extent the current ESCOM unbundling model will genuinely create a competitive electricity market, and what you'd perhaps highlight as some of the key risks that could prevent meaningful market access for independent power producers as well as large customers, because access to markets, creating a competitive environment, those are some of the key requirements or some of the key objectives of this.
What's interesting about South Africa in its current state is that we're currently moving from a developing nation into a developed nation. As a hallmark of a developed nation, and we think of old world terminology of first world and third world, we're moving from third world to first world, and that the hallmark of a first world or developed nation is that it has this competitive electricity sector that we're moving towards, where there's independent power producers that are able to produce power however they want. So that's mostly through renewables, as there's incentives in the marketplace for purchasing renewable power and also decarbonizing your footprint as a business. So independent power producers all provide electricity at a certain price, as cheap as they're able to, and then that's then purchased by an independent, separate transmission system operator that plays as the market player and the marketplace and purchases electricity the cheapest first, and then provides electricity to the electricity users. And what's interesting now is this unbundling of ESCOM was envisioned already from 2017. It was outlined in the 1998 white paper, talking about we need to move to a state where it's not just a vertically integrated monopoly, but in order for us to become like an international player and a developed nation, we need to bring about this democratized energy sector. And now there's been a recent shift, apart from just separating out transmission, ESCOM, to distribution, to generation. Now we're seeing that the National Transmission Company of South Africa, that's now being separated, is going to further separate into a separate transmission system operator, which I think is a good move, as it then separates out the interests of the different players. There was potentially a conflict of interest if the transmission system operator remained within ESCOM National Transmission Company South Africa, because we also have ESCOM Green that's vying for capacity within the expanding transmission sector now. So it could have been that the NTCA playing the transmission system operator played to the tune of ESCOM Generation and ESCOM Green, giving them capacity first and preference rather than making it a truly democratized sector. So it's exciting news. It seems that there's been some thought put into this process and a lot of advice, and it's also a well-worn path that we've seen from other nations that have gone through this process. So I'm glad to see that as we're going, we're changing course slightly, but we're doing it in a way that is making sense for South Africa.
Let's focus for a moment on the planned transmission build-out. Given its scale, what are the biggest execution risks, and which one is most likely to delay renewable and storage projects over the next, let's say, 5 years?
Great. So we do have some risks that are on the horizon. So we recently had this national transmission plan announced, and 7 bidders, preferred bidders, have been announced all across the world, have been named as potential contractors that will be working on our transmission system from Spain to India, Middle East, South Africa as well. So there is a risk here where we saw previous times when there was these kinds of rounds of public participation. We think of the Renewable Energy Power Producer Program, bid winner 5 and 6, which both pretty much failed in that only half of the projects met financial close and actually moved forward from bid winner 5 and bid winner 6. For bid winner 5 was mainly for financial constraints, so that's one key risk. Coming back to your previous question, what are the risks? Is that there's a bid that's done by these companies where they say, oh, we'll be able to build it for X amount, say 10 million rand. And then when it comes about in 9 months' time, when they actually start to build, there's some global disruption. And in bid winner 5, it was that the Ukraine war started, and that made the price of logistics and receiving goods that were pertinent to solar farms and wind farms really increased 50% in terms of their transportation costs. And then the companies that bid said, oh, we can't actually meet our commitments because we bid at a certain price that we thought it would be, and now it's doubled, or the price has gone up by 50%. So there's a financial price where there's global shifts in what's going on internationally in terms of logistics and just even supply. supply of aluminium, supply of base materials that are needed for construction, they could increase between the point where the bid is confirmed and then now they actually need to construct. So there's a financial risk. Then there's also this aspect of bid window 6 saw this, where Eskom wasn't ready to actually accept all of the solar and wind farm electricity that was awarded. So it seemed like there wasn't a chat between NERSA and Eskom aligning on what transmission capacity is actually available. Now they realized, okay, we've got a good constraint. Now they're going out for bid again. But there might be aspects within Eskom where they aren't actually ready to onboard these companies that are coming to construct the transmission grid. And there's logistical issues within Eskom and interacting with another company to deploy something. And from my experience when I was there at Eskom for 11 years, I unfortunately never saw a project that was worth above 5 billion rand that was implemented on time. They were typically, on average, implemented in double the time. So we think of Medupi, we think of Kusile, we think of any large capital build program. It takes around about double the time. And unfortunately, for those two power stations that I named, it was 3 times the cost. So it doesn't seem like Eskom has a good track record on actually doing big projects quickly or doing it to a good quality as well, because those power stations themselves aren't performing well. So that is also a risk of, like, we're relying on Eskom still to kind of do integrate with these companies, and it remains to be seen whether it'll actually be quick enough to have the deadlines met of 2030.
It's exactly 4:44 Central African time. In about 15 minutes' time, we'll be handing over to Vue d'Afrique and the French desk. But for now, a focus on the G20 and where South Africa stands. The President of South Africa has reaffirmed South Africa's standing within the G20, dismissing any suggestion that the country needs an invitation to participate. Spokesperson Vincent Magwenya stressed that South Africa is a founding member of the bloc with an inherent right to take part in all G20 engagements. Magwenya went further, warning that the United States is pushing an approach that undermines multilateralism, an agenda that he says must be confronted and prevented. SABC News correspondent Nick Harper filed this report.
I think it's interesting to note the severe lack of fanfare that is surrounding these initial G20 meetings. The finance ministers meeting that's meant to be getting underway and the Sherpas meeting. As in any other country, under any other normal circumstance, would normally make a lot of fanfare about this. It would be an opportunity to speak about goals over the next 12 months. You would have officials from the State Department, the White House, coming forward to lay all of this out. And yet that's exactly what we are not seeing. This is something that is taking place without fanfare, without the opportunity of high-ranking officials to come out and champion not just the US causes, but really what the US hopes to achieve over the next 12 months. But I think that very much aligns with the Trump White House and its seemed plans for the G20. As we heard, this idea of it being an affront to multilateralism, excluding South Africa. But we know that multilateralism is not exactly something that the Trump administration loves and enjoys. It's something that it tries to shirk. Its involvement in the United Nations, for example, which is all about multilateralism, is very, very lacking. And yet the Trump administration is all about that unilateral approach, that America first idea. And therefore, we're really hearing nothing about what is taking place over these 2 days, nothing about the agenda and what they're hoping to discuss. We've heard from the Trump administration in very scant details about what they will be looking to do over the next 12 months. But in terms of these first few days, the opportunity for fanfare, it's certainly something that the Trump administration is not taking the opportunity to publicise. They are very much looking for a scaled-down G20 set of meetings during the course of this year. I think really leading up to the Leaders' Summit next November, an opportunity perhaps for Donald Trump to take the stage and be involved in a little bit of multilateralism, but scaling back many of the meetings that you would normally see during that one-year presidency, the opportunity to try and grapple with some of the biggest, not just economic problems facing the world, but other things like inequality, poverty, climate change. Those type of things will not, it would seem, be on the United States agenda. In terms of other countries and their response, we've already heard a bit of grumbling from other countries, including, for example, the German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz. He said that he was hoping to change President Donald Trump's mind at some point over the next year to allow South Africa to be involved. We've also heard from China, who would prefer, they say, for South Africa to be involved. We know, as we heard just a moment ago, South Africa is not looking for other countries to boycott this meeting, but they're also hoping that this will not set a precedent, the ability for one country to unilaterally exclude another. And that's why we've seen the Department of International Relations and Cooperation putting out this letter to other G20 nations saying that they are requesting that the issue of South Africa's exclusion be placed on the agenda. They want discussion and clarification about this point. They want to ensure that it doesn't set a precedent going forward. So they are petitioning other G20 members to try and take their side, but they're not looking for an all-out boycott. We know that as part of this initial Monday-Tuesday set of meetings, we should be seeing the finance ministers, the bank governors getting together, at least to begin discussions on things like stability, growth, financial system reforms. But in terms of one other essential set of meetings that will not be taking place, and that's the G20 Troika. This is the idea that the last G20 president, the current G20 president, and the future G20 president, so a grouping of 3 countries, would come together to discuss things. So normally you would see South Africa, the United States and the United Kingdom, who will be taking this over in 2026, 2027, come together to discuss really an idea for consistency, for collaboration. But the United States has told South Africa that Troika Forum will be ditched. That will not be taking place. So there is that concern, that idea of continuity, continuing on some of the really big things that were discussed in Johannesburg. That simply will not happen this time around.
That was SABC News correspondent Nick Harper taking us to exactly 4:49.
As 2025 draws to a close, we pause to honor the spirits that connect us.
Let's get it started.
The festive season reminds us of what truly matters: family, community, and unity. No matter where you gather or reflect, Channel Africa is with you, bringing you stories and voices that are shaped by the African perspective.
Something significant happened on this day. Asanda, you were a baby, I'm sure. I'm not even sure if you were born. No, you were a baby, yeah.
Yoga. Matseko is still trying to convince me.
No, I've done that already, and you're going to come now on the journey.
I will try.
From all of us to all of you, may your season be safe and peaceful. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Africa means business. Tune into Africa in Business with Thami Ngubeni for the future of the African economy. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
As we come to the tail end of Africa in Business, we make way for Vue d'Afrique and the French desk with Joël. Bonjour Joël, what's on your agenda aujourd'hui?
Bonjour Thami, bonjour à tous les auditeurs. Alors sur Vue d'Afrique aujourd'hui, il sera question de la RDC, plus précisément de l'Est de la République démocratique du Congo. Le M23 annonce le retrait sous condition de ses forces de la ville d'Ouvira. On le verra avec notre invité en ligne. Nous parlerons également du Mali où 9 hauts gradés radiés de l'armée ont saisi la Cour suprême. Nous parlerons également de l'ancien chef rebelle congolais Roger Lumbala qui a été condamné à 30 ans de réclusion criminelle. Merci Thami, c'est tout à l'heure sur Vue d'Afrique.
Merci beaucoup. That's Joël coming up with Vue d'Afrique in just a few moments. Well, as we wrap up our Standard Bank slot for this year, we are going to be reflecting on the annual Standard Bank Enterprise and Supplier Development Awards, otherwise known as the ESD Awards, and those were held last Friday at the Four Seasons, the Westcliff Hotel, north of Johannesburg in South Africa. To shed more light on this, we're joined by Nokhanyo Mchingila, Senior Manager for Enterprise and Supplier Development Programs at Business and Commercial Banking South Africa for Standard Bank Group. A very good afternoon to you, Nokhanyo. Good to have you with us. Could you tell us more about the ESD Awards and what it is that inspired the awards this year? Welcome.
Good afternoon, Thami, and good afternoon to the listeners. Yes, on Friday last week, we had our third annual ESD Awards. So these awards are a platform where we recognize and celebrate the enterprises that have demonstrated exceptional progress through our enterprise and supplier development program. So some of our work within our ESD programs include empowering these businesses through soft skills development, access to markets, access to funding, and access to resources. So that's how we support them. So the purpose of these awards, I mean, like you mentioned, it was our third annual ESD awards. So the purpose, Thami, is threefold. First, we acknowledge the resilience and performance of these entrepreneurs who really have worked a demanding journey of growth, through our programs. The second one is to demonstrate the impact of the ESD program as a catalyst for inclusive economic growth. Thirdly, we aim to create visibility and credibility of these entrepreneurs in front of decision makers, procurement leaders, and ecosystem partners, because we are very deliberate about who is in the room, because it's not just to celebrate and say, hey, you've done well. What does that mean for an entrepreneur after that? So we deliberate about who's in the room, and when we announce them, they know who these entrepreneurs are, what they're doing, and there might be some collaboration, etc., for them. So that is really the purpose of these awards. If I can just elaborate also on the theme for this year, where we spoke about architects of African growth. And for us, the theme recognizes these entrepreneurs as active builders of African economic future. They're not just passive participants, they're actually very active. Remember, they create jobs, they solve local problems, and they strengthen the value chains, they grow the economic, the economy of South Africa. So they really are designing growth that is sustainable, inclusive, and rooted in African realities. So
I'm really also quite interested in the winners. Can you share some of the details of who they are, what type of businesses they run, and some of the recognition that they will receive and the impact that will have for them, their careers, and their businesses?
Yeah, so if I can just mention a few of the winners. There's a business called Melokuhle Holdings that was also one of the winners. In terms of what they walked away with over and above the recognition, is the first place walked away with 100,000 rand grant funding towards their business. In the second place, they also got 50,000 rand towards their business. So it's just seed funding for for them to buy whatever they need for their business, whether it's stock, equipment, anything that they'll need to further grow their businesses. So we have a business called Melokuhle Holdings. They joined our program through our Women in Business program called Basadi Development Program. Small company, women-owned business, and they've done phenomenally well over their journey within our program. They doubled their workforce. They expanded into new markets. They are part of the bank's value chain, because some of the work that we do from these emerging businesses, we also integrate them into the bank's value chain. And this company is one of those, gaining access to finance and mentorship and sustainable growth opportunities. We also have businesses in the tech space that really have done so well for themselves, youth-owned businesses. We also have sector-focused businesses that have also walked away with prizes, businesses in the agricultural space, also a woman-owned business that has also uplifted their community. They employ youth within their community to support them in their business. They really have grown in the space. So those are some of the examples of businesses that have been awarded and celebrated through the awards, Thami.
Right. So, Ms. Njingila, what role do financial institutions like Standard Bank play in building a sustainable entrepreneurial ecosystem on the African continent?
So within Standard Bank, BCB, enterprise and supplier development. We regard ourselves as playing a very critical role in supporting these businesses and their growth. So we support them with a combination of things, which include structural and practical support tools. We support them with access to funding. We support them with being fundable businesses. We know that some of the challenges that are faced by small businesses, in particular in South Africa, is that there is a big challenge and gap in terms of them being fundable businesses. So we support them into being fundable businesses with our programs and development programs. They also move from being grant recipients to growing their businesses. So within our Standard Bank, we've got a lot of tools that support them with that over and above the traditional products that the bank has. So I think commercial banks in particular, or at large, they really have a big role to supporting and giving tools, practical tools that will allow this or enable these businesses to grow organically and really to move away from chasing grants, because that's one of the other challenges that is huge within the businesses, small businesses within South Africa. They find it easier to go and look for grant funding, which is fair, but how far can you go? So one of the things that we really pride ourselves in is to, when we empower them, we teach them, through our service providers, how do you become a sustainable
and that is so key.
Business.
No, that certainly is so key, putting them in that environment, but also saying that you're not going to be there forever, and teaching them how to move forward on their own. Ms. Nokhanyo Njingila, we thank you so much for your insight and your time, and congratulations on the ESD Awards.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We celebrate these businesses, and we really want to say to them, they are the architects of South Africa, of Africa's growth, and we want to support them through Standard Bank, ESD. We remain very committed to walking that journey with them and unlocking opportunities that enable the sustainable growth across our continent. Thank you, Thami.
Thank you, ma'am. That's Nokhanyo Njingila, Senior Manager for Enterprise and Supply Development Programs at Business and Commercial Banking South Africa for Standard Bank Group. Well, that's how we as Africa in Business come to the end of Africa in Business for this afternoon. Thank you so much to our entire team, and thank you to you as we hand over to Vue d'Afrique. It's 5 p.m.
Vue d'Afrique, un magazine des actualités en français sur Channel Africa. Rendez-vous du lundi au vendredi avec Joël Mouteba sur Channel Africa de 15h à 16h, temps universel. Channel Africa, la perspective africaine.
Bonjour à tous et merci de vous connecter sur notre site internet le www.channelafrica.co.za pour suivre Vue d'Afrique, le magazine d'actualité africaine en langue française. Nous émettons depuis nos studios d'Auckland Park en Afrique du Sud et Lerato est à la technique. Voici sans tarder les principaux titres qui font l'actualité du jour. Est de la République démocratique